After America is made on the lands of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Hi, I'm Emma Shortis, and this is After America. The President of Peace is at it again. The Trump administration is amassing forces in the Middle East and once again threatening war with Iran. He is receiving tributes from members of his personal board of peace. He is emblazoning the Department of Justice with a banner featuring his own face. And he is very sad about the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the disgraced former prince.
I think it's a shame. I think it's very sad. I think it's so bad for the royal family. It's a very, very sad. To me, it's a very sad thing. When I see that, it's a very sad thing.
He also seems to have suggested that aliens are real.
Barack Obama said that aliens are real. Have you seen any evidence of non-human visitors to Earth?
Well, he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that. You know?
So aliens are real?
Well, I don't know if they're real or not. I can tell you he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that.
Here's hoping. We didn't quite get to the extraterrestrials, but this week we're pleased to welcome back our very dear friend, Allan Behm. Allan is Special Advisor in International and Security Affairs at the Australia Institute. We spoke about the significant risks the United States is taking with Iran, the state of the United Nations, and the Trumpian racism that infused Australian politics this week. Allan, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Oh, very well, thank you, Emma, and thank you very much for having me back.
It's always a pleasure. It is a little bit of a risk for us, though, this week. We're recording on Friday morning Australian time, which means we'll miss the big US news cycle, which, usually happens on Sunday afternoon. And that's, I think, particularly pressing for us because as we are recording, the Trump administration is engaged in this enormous military buildup in the Middle East in pursuit of some kind of Trumpian deal with Iran. And reports are increasingly indicating that some kind of strike or war seems very likely. And in fact, the scale of the buildup seems to indicate more than just a strike. What do you think is going on here?
Well, first of all, let's just talk about the buildup, Emma. One of the things about military buildups is it sort of seems to be a kind of Newton's law of momentum where you get to a point where you can't stop it. If you think back to the beginnings of the Gulf War around Kuwait, in fact, the United States didn't have to go to war on behalf of Kuwait because they could have pushed Saddam Hussein back into Iraq just with the threat of war. But it built up so quickly and so fast that it became sort of unstoppable. And my feeling is here on Friday morning in Australia that the build-up of force in the Mediterranean is beginning to look unstoppable to me. And the impetus towards some kind of action, which President Trump will claim to be decisive action, as Venezuela was, for example, is now probably unstoppable. I hope it isn't, and I hope that I'm wrong, Emma, for reasons that we'll get into. But I'm now expecting that there will be military action directed towards Iran in the next short while.
They can't have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. You can't have peace in the Middle East if they have a nuclear weapon. So now we may have to take it a step further, or we may not. Maybe we're going to make a deal. Well, you're going to be finding out over the next probably 10 days. They must make a deal. Bad things will happen if it doesn't.
Allan, it seems, it almost seems like a silly question because it's Trump we're dealing with and I don't necessarily think there is an answer. But do you think the Trump administration or Trump even actually knows what he wants out of decisive, quote unquote, decisive action in Iran? Because there seem to be so many different messages coming from the administration. 6 months ago in July last year, it was about totally and completely obliterating Iran's uranium enrichment capability, which, clearly didn't happen. They're also talking about the need for a bigger deal with Iran. And of course, the usual suspects are also talking about regime change. So I suppose the question there is decisive action to what end?
Emma, I think Trump does know what he wants. It's just that what he wants is not the sort of thing that you and I, as people who study the use of armed force and the use of power generally in the conduct of international relations, start or end with. We don't think like Trump. What Trump
Thankfully.
wants is to appear decisive. He wants to appear powerful. Trump wants to appear to be Trump. And he wants to remind the world all the time that he's actually in charge. He always claims victory, whatever he does, whether it's bombing nuclear facilities in Iran and claims massive success using his limited 7-year-old vocabulary of magnificent result and all of that. And then when it's not a magnificent result, he will describe the non-magnificent result as being exactly what he wanted. He wanted the result that he got because he's very good at getting good results. So he will simply redefine the ground again. So Trump is not looking for what we as professional analysts of international relations or how you get yourself into a war, how you conduct yourself in war, and then how you end it, the creation of an end state. If you look at the United States and the Middle East, they've never designed the end state. They've never said what it is that they want. They've never said what it is that is going to define success or victory. And I mean, I can look back over 60 years of United States military action, and the clearest example of how you turn failure into success was Kissinger's peace with honour out of Vietnam. No peace and no honour, but you just put a badge on it and declare that to be the case. Mission accomplished from President Bush. The bombing of Iran last year. I mean, all of these things just show that if your starting point in the conduct of international relations is the use of armed force, then armed force is itself the measure of success. And I think that that's deeply worrying because it doesn't take you to a strategic conclusion. It doesn't take you to, I hate the word end state, Emma, as you know, but it doesn't take you to a conclusion to armed conflict from which you can say there has actually been an improvement here. We've made whatever it is that we thought we were doing, we've made a success out of it, or we've made the world a better place or something. It is just simply we've used armed force and it was very successful.
Yeah.
And I think that for Trump is the measure of success.
Yeah. And what do you think, Allan, are the risks of that for Iran and the Middle East and the rest of the world?
Emma, I think we can talk about this until forces joined in 3 or 4 days' time, because I think the risks are at this point massive. And I mean really massive, because since the beginning of this Trump administration, we've had the continuous validation of the use of armed force and bluster and all that as a principal tool in managing global security and global stability. Not only is it not working, it's making the prospects for global stability even more precarious. So let's just start close in to Iran and see that to smash into Iran at this time, perhaps to so destabilise the Iranian leadership that its ability to govern is no longer tenable, and to unleash all sorts of forces of counter-revolution, forces of destruction, with no idea who will be in charge and how, and what they will be seeking to achieve. Will they be seeking to achieve a benefit for the Iranian people? Well, I wouldn't be starting there. Would they seek to achieve a benefit for their own regime? Yeah, well, that might be a good place to start. And if they have an incompetent like the son of the Shah come in as the leader of the country, then you can be certain that the country will remain as explosive as it was when the Shah was deposed in 1979. Move a little bit further out, come to Syria. It makes the prospect of stability in Syria even more impossible than it's looking at the moment. And what it might do for Israel is, I think, equally problematic. it may equally encourage that kind of recklessness that we've seen from Prime Minister Netanyahu, or it might encourage the very profound split within Israeli politics that's just teetering on the brink of bringing Netanyahu down. And so the alternatives just for Israel are very profound. And in all of this, we've got to remember that Israel is a key player, because the whole Iranian nuclear program is actually premised on Israel's possession of nuclear weapons. And Iran saying, well, look, the only way we can maintain our security is to have a deterrent capacity in the same way as Israel says it's got a deterrent capacity. Well, the big problem with deterrence is that it can only be proved not to have worked when it's failed. And we know that it doesn't work because it's a game of bluff. So the mathematics of it tell you that it won't work. But this is a situation now where all of that, for one reason or another, could be brought to a head. And that's why I'm saying that this is not just regionally perilous. I think it's globally perilous, because it then begins seriously to legitimise the threats that Putin and Lavrov have been directing towards Ukraine. And I think at that point, nobody knows where the boundaries are anymore.
Just some mild terror, I suppose, Alan, for this Friday morning. You mentioned there, of course, the Middle East, and Israel is a major player in the Middle East. The other thing that Trump, of course, has been doing this week is holding the first meeting of his so-called Board of Peace, which is supposed to, I suppose, reconstruct Gaza. Many of the same men, and they're mostly overwhelmingly men who stood back and watched as Gaza was destroyed, and now claiming to want to rebuild it with Trump and this Board of Peace, and presumably, given what we know about them, enrich themselves and their own regimes in the process. What do you make of what the Board of Peace is doing and the inherent risks in this going ahead?
Look, Emma, you have a very lovely audience for your podcast, and I don't want to say anything which could in any way offend any members of your audience, but I don't myself call it the Board of Peace. If I had to call it anything that was semi-polite, I'd call it the Board of Piss, and that is about the best I can say about it. It is highly destructive, Emma, as a concept, not so much because it represents an alternative to other ways of dealing with global order. It in fact represents a destruction of any other way of managing global order, because it is built around the pretensions of President Trump. So yeah. I'm really extending my sort of commentary on this Board of Peace issue to my commentary on what is Trump looking for by threatening Iran. For Trump, success is I am in charge. The Board of Peace is nothing more than an extension of the golf club at Mar-a-Lago. Trump's the president. You pay Trump to become a member of the club. The green fees you pay to Trump. If you hit the ball out of bounds and you suffer a 2-stroke penalty, well, you would have been wagering anyway, so you pay another penalty to Trump. The whole thing, Emma, is built around Trump's pretension not only to the leadership of the United States, and that is constitutionally not a pretense, he is the leader of the United States, but his pretension is that he is somebody who's left George Washington in his wake. This is the new leadership of the United States. His global pretension is rather similar. He is actively seeking to chuck out everything that was agreed from Potsdam onwards in favour of some delicious little dream of his own, which sets Mar-a-Lago up as the paradigm for global governance. I mean, it would be a joke if the consequences weren't so serious.
Yeah.
And I think, as I say, to call it the Board of Piss is to give it a signal honour.
I reckon our listeners can handle it. Alan, I think they'll be okay.
The United Nations will be, I think, is going to be much stronger, and the Board of Peace is going to almost be looking over the United Nations and making sure it runs properly.
I guess on this theme of global governance, Trump has said it directly. He never pretends. He always says the quiet part out loud. And at the Board of Peace meeting, he actually said that the Board of Peace is going to be almost looking over the United Nations and making sure it runs properly. You actually wrote in the Point this week about the state of the United Nations and what the Trump administration is, in particular, is doing to that. And that's something that I think is maybe flying under the radar a little bit. We're very cognizant of the undermining of the rule of law, but not necessarily of the institutions that maintain that rule of law. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Look, Emma, I think that if you want to destroy the global rules-based order behind which the Australian government likes to hide all the time, the best way of doing that is to destroy the institutions that actually implement it. If you want to destroy the law, you do two things. You destroy the courts so that people can't have adjudication done about how the law operates in human relationships of all kinds. And the next thing you do is you take over the law enforcement arms of government so that not only have you destroyed the courts, but you actually own both sides of the hanging quotient. You sentence people to death and then you kill them. And what the human race has worked out for quite a long time, really, is that you keep those two parts separate. You keep the executive part separate from the decision part, because that then reinforces or demonstrates the integrity of the system. But the moment you want to destroy the international rule of law, you destroy its institutions, and then the system has no integrity whatsoever. And Trump has already well embarked upon that. He's effectively destroyed the WTO because it has no arbitral functions anymore because there's no court. He won't appoint people to it. And destroying the WTO is effectively destroying the semi or the quasi-judicial function that sits underneath balancing and managing global economic relationships through trade. And once you do that, you're inviting people back into the awful mercantilist trade wars that marked the growth and then the decline of the imperial systems of the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. And we worked out a way of actually managing the world after that. Destroy that, and you're taking yourself back into a kind of anarchistic chaos. And we're evidently headed in that direction. That's why what's happening in the Middle East just today is so dangerous, because other parts of the UN system, and I'm thinking particularly of the UN Security Council, they have no legitimacy either anymore, because any one of the P5 can walk away from it. They can exercise their veto and nothing happens. So Trump sets up an alternate system which is designed both to enhance his own power and to smash down the power of the one system that came out of the San Francisco Conference in 1945, in which Australia had a massive investment through Dr. Everett. So that's what I was sort of talking about a little bit earlier in the week. But it's no surprise, Emma, is it? I mean, you're a person who knows a hell of a lot more about how that works within the United States. And I suspect that you would have a bit of a model in mind here of how they can actually do it to themselves as well as doing it to the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the way you described the erosion of the international rule of law is reflected domestically in the United States. That's exactly what the Trump administration is doing at home, and it's exporting that out abroad. And I think it goes to the point that we always try to make, that, you can't draw these lines between domestic politics and international relations because they don't exist. One is a reflection of the other. Which actually brings me back to, you mentioned Australia there, and I want to talk to you about Australia and Australia's role. You mentioned Australia's significant contribution to the building of those institutions of international law that we so relied on. The Australian government, when it comes to the Board of Peace, seems to be, I suppose, slow-walking a response. They are reviewing the invitation and, I mean, I suspect want to get to a no, that they don't want to be involved in this, but either don't want to be too loud about that no or are worried about the risks of saying no. Is that what you think is happening?
Yes. Look, it's been clear that the path of least resistance is the cardinal rule for the conduct of international relations by the Australian government. It is not going to do anything which even risks catching Trump's attention, far less make him angry or cross or disappointed or whatever. And yet, just think about this. What do you imagine Australia's standing might be if we were to do something which is not simply copycatting Mark Carney or sort of following the Mark Carney playbook and making some entertaining references to Thucydides, but was actually to say, hey, what you're recommending here smashes down something in which Australia has itself made a massive investment through its foreign minister in 1945 in San Francisco. And the historical and the negotiating record of that meeting in San Francisco has the American representative Stettinius proclaim the contribution that Australia's Foreign Minister Doc Evatt made to the construction of the UN Charter and the International Human Rights Convention of the UN. And that is a legacy which we should be very proud of, but which we should also defend. So I don't think we've got to say to President Trump, hey, you're mad, or you're a solipsist, or you're an egotist, or you're a narcissist, all of which are true, but everybody knows that bit. Let's tell them something that they don't really know about, but why we are deeply invested in this outcome, because we are historically a contributor to both how you set up the international rules-based order and then how you manage it. And what you're proposing flies in the face of that, so we can't support it. Now, I don't see any problem in saying that, and I reckon our stakes would rise everywhere, but most particularly in that group of about 50 countries which, like us, operate reasonable democratic systems and understand what the international rule of law actually does for their prosperity.
Allan, I mean, perhaps it's too cynical of me, but we've said before that we probably can't expect the Australian government to fight Trumpism abroad if they're not willing to do it at home. And I think we've seen a pretty significant example of that this week in Australian domestic politics, where we've had a Liberal Party proposal about immigration leaked that was startlingly Trumpian. It talked about banning immigration from particular regions. It talked about deportation. It talked about social media vetting. And then, of course, we've got the leader of One Nation, Pauline Hanson, once again engaging in, appallingly racist and Islamophobic comments with what I think is very little pushback from the Australian government. But this is not just an issue, of course, that's affecting Australia. It's consistent, and we've talked about this a lot, it's consistent in Australia, it's consistent in the United States, in Europe as well. What is happening across democracies? Why does this keep happening, and why is it so consistent, do you think?
Oh, Emma, you're about to make me burst into tears, Emma, and that's not a dignified position for somebody of my antiquity to be involved in. So I'm going to fight back the tears and see if I can answer the question a little bit. Look, the issue around immigration, I have found the whole of this personally very confronting, because what's the point of being an Australian citizen if you can't be treated as an Australian citizen? And so I'm referring here directly to the women and their children, by the way, who are locked in Syria in refugee camps, who are Australian citizens, who appear to have Australian passports. They may have been extremely stupid, which I think they were, and they may have been criminal. I don't know, because none of their matters have been toward the court. So I don't know how the Prime Minister has come to the conclusion that they are intrinsically contemptible and that, you inherit contemptibility, so their kids are contemptible as well. And he has no respect for them when the only respect he needs to show is the respect that you would demonstrate to any Australian citizen. But we're a bit continuous in this, Emma, by the way. I mean, little kids who found themselves migrating from New Zealand to Australia, but have never straightened up their citizenship in Australia. So they commit a crime in their 50s and they're booted out and sent back to Kiwi land as though they had no rights.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that we've got to respect rights if we're going to talk about the international rule of law. So I'm really disappointed about that. But sitting underneath that general question that we're seeing from the opposition and seeing from the government, I think is something much more profound. I think it is something that happens to all societies. Big call, Allan, but I think it does happen to all societies, and that is that when societies are in times of very great stress, driven by uncertainty, massive uncertainty about their own futures, where the world's going, where they're going, how they're going to hold it all together, a whole lot of other things happen. And the first thing that happens, I think, is that there is a radical increase in fear. Cynical politicians play on that. And we've had that fear play going on in Australia right back since the very beginning of AUKUS, for example, where we're going to spend unbelievable amounts of money because we're frightened of China. And the moment you get a bit frightened, create an other out there somewhere so that you can express your fear through fear of the other. It is deeply racist, and that's the first retreat of fear, otherness and racism, and it shows up everywhere. And thank God that in Australia we still have people who will stand up for the rights of everybody who's a citizen. And it's very unusual for somebody like me to have a big shout out for Marine Faruqi, but she is standing up for a fundamental principle. And that is a principle which is at the heart of the Labor Party's basic set of principles. And it's so disappointing to find that the party of government, the party that wants to be the continuing party of government, is not standing up for the fundamental principles on which any party of government in a democracy must stand, which is the individual dignity of the human person who is our citizen. And I just find all of this just incredibly confronting because it is not consistent with what we proclaim all the time as being our national values. So the very call on our national values is an exercise in cynicism.
Allan, I mean, we keep doing it on the show, painting such a gruesome picture of the state of the world, which I think is an accurate one, but it is, it's devastating to think that this is the way we're going. And I mean, the obvious follow-up question, of course, is what do we do about it? Because it's so easy to feel totally out of control, as if we have no say in what is happening. But I mean, that's, first of all, that's not a fair question. But second of all, I think, you've also pointed to the answer in the picture that you painted, in that the obvious path, the only path, is that return to first principles that you mentioned, the first principles that are found in the United Nations Charter, in the preamble, that Australia played such a significant role in inventing and coming up with. And, that is the first principle of the dignity and worth of every human being, purely by a fact of their humanity. And, that is a foundational first principle of the Labor Party as well. And returning to that is actually quite straightforward, I think, and a clear choice that can be made and would demonstrate such a significant leadership in a world that is desperate, I think, for that leadership. And I think that's where we can find the answer to that question, that ever-present question of what do we do? And returning to first principles, I think, is the place that we have to start. And you are so incredible, I think, at explaining that and articulating that and bringing international relations back to that first principle, that it is about human beings and about human relationships. It's not about big power games. It's about making people safer. And we can make the choice to show leadership there.
Emma, you've summed up in a few sentences what's taken me a couple of thousand words to say this morning. Congratulations, because it's much more optimistic than my sentences were.
Oh, we've got to find optimism, don't we, Alan? Because what is the choice? But it is always, despite that gruesome picture, it is always an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. So thank you so much for joining us, as always.
Thank you, Emma.
Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode. The latest Vantage Point essay, What We Owe the Water, It's Time for a Fossil Fuel Treaty, is available now from Australia Institute Press. Written by South African human rights and environmental justice advocate Kumi Naidoo, this edition is available now for $19.95. Pod listeners can get free shipping by using the code PODVP, that's PODVP, at checkout. You can also become a subscriber to the Vantage Point series. For just $64.95, you'll get 4 engaging essays a year on some of the most pressing issues facing Australia and the world. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. You can reach us via our email address, which is podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. This episode was recorded on Friday, the 20th of February. After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation and produced by Angus Blackman. We'll be back next week. I'm Emma Shortis. Thanks for listening.